Hey everyone, and welcome to Drive Steady. The 2020 Shelby GT500 is the new kid on the block in the ongoing horsepower muscle car wars. So in this video, we're going to compare the specs of the GT500 to the Camaro ZL1 and the Dodge Challenger Hellcat. The GT500, Challenger, and Camaro all have iconic names in the muscle car era of the late 60s and 70s. In today's market, those names are more associated with pony cars or full-fledged sports cars that can turn eye-popping quarter-mile times, then turn around and give a supercar a run for its money on the track. The Camaro ZL1 has been around for a couple years now, and since its debut in 2017, even though the sales numbers may not show it, it's actually a great car with good balance of horsepower and chassis to take along that horsepower. It seems like the Dodge Challenger Hellcat has been out for a decade now, but it still rocks. Dodge has done a great job in refreshing the Hellcat with extra power, new colors, and my personal favorite, the wide body package. It takes a different angle in this segment, and that's I'm going to punch you in the mouth with a bunch of horsepower. It can handle, but it's definitely not the autocross scalpel in this group. And finally, the GT500. It's unique in this group because it stands as the most balanced amongst the three. It offers punch-you-in-the-mouth horsepower like the Hellcat, and even though it's heavier than the Camaro, it counterbalances that with a track package that gives it more capable handling. Alright, so that's the drum roll to the comparison. Now let's set the ground rules and get started. I'm going to compare the base version of these cars. However, in some categories I will use specs from a higher trim level or option package. For example, I may use the track package equipped GT500 because I can't find any numbers on a base car. Same goes for the Camaro ZL1 and the 1LE package. Alright, so I'm excited to see how this turns out, guys. Let's get started. The ZL1 comes with a supercharged 6.2-liter overhead cam 16-valve V8 engine that pumps out 650 horsepower and 650 foot-pounds of torque with a red line of 6,600 RPM. You can get the ZL1 in a 6-speed manual or a 10-speed automatic. The Dodge Challenger Hellcat is equipped with a supercharged 6.2-liter 16-valve V8, pushing 717 horsepower and 650 foot-pounds of torque with a red line of 6,200 RPM. The Challenger Hellcat is also available with a 6-speed manual and an 8-speed automatic. Now let's look at the Shelby. It's got a 5.2-liter double overhead cam 32-valve supercharged V8 that makes 760 horsepower and 625 foot-pounds of torque with a red line of 7,500 RPM. The GT500 is only available in a 7-speed double-clutch transmission. One thing that's interesting is that all these engines are supercharged V8s. It doesn't seem like Ford, Dodge, or Chevy want any part of turbochargers in these muscle cars. It's interesting because most other sports car manufacturers are going turbo. Me personally, I also prefer a supercharged engine, but who knows, maybe things will change in the future for these cars. Alright, let's look at these numbers. First, horsepower. The GT500 has 43 more horsepower than the Challenger Hellcat and a whopping 110 over the Camaro ZL1. Torque. The Camaro ZL1 and the Challenger Hellcat are equal and best the Shelby GT500 by 25 foot-pounds of torque. And finally, the Shelby GT500 spins to a higher redline RPM by 900 against the Camaro ZL1 and 1300 more than the Challenger Hellcat. It's really amazing how Ford has been able to build a 760 horsepower supercharged engine with a 7500 RPM redline. I remember some time ago, if an engine revved up to 7,000 RPM, that was amazing, and typically those would be naturally aspirated engines. The Shelby GT500 engine is supercharged. I suppose those are the benefits of having a double overhead cam 32-valve engine. Now let's look at the history of power and torque for these cars. The first time a ZL1 trim was produced was in 1969. From the factory, it was rated at 430 horsepower and 450 foot-pounds of torque, but in the real world it produced north of 500 horsepower, some believe closer to 550. The story of the ZL1 engine is pretty amazing. Chevrolet said, nope, the regular 427 engine isn't enough. Mind you, these are the same 427s that came in the Corvettes at the time. Chevrolet put an all-aluminum 427 in the Camaro and called it the ZL1. The amazing part about this racing engine was its lightweight. The 427 ZL1 engine weighed as little as a 327 small block found in the Corvette, which is remarkable. Anyway, that's the first generation. Fast forward to 2012, Chevrolet bought back the ZL1 name in the Camaro and gave it 580 horsepower and 556 foot-pounds of torque. And finally, the third generation now has 650 horsepower and 650 foot-pounds of torque. The Camaro ZL1 has always been a big horsepower car, and that trend continues to the current generation of cars. From its inception in '69 through the current 2020 model, the Camaro has gained 220 horsepower. Next, let's look at the Shelby. Officially, the Shelby GT500 name was produced in 3 Mustang generations: the 1st gen, the 5th gen, and finally the current 6th generation. If you're a GT500 fan, you know that in between those years, several big upgrades were applied to the GT500. Those notable years are highlighted here with the 68 KR, the 2011 GT500, and one of my favorites, the 2013 model with 662 horsepower. From its inception in 1967 through the current 2020 model year, the Shelby GT500 has increased its base horsepower by 114% or 405 horsepower. I didn't make a historical chart for the Challenger Hellcat because it's never existed prior to the 2015 model year, and it's gone up only 10 horsepower since its existence. Alright, let's talk 0 to 60 times next. The Camaro ZL1 gets to 60 in 3.5 seconds using the 10-speed auto. I was also able to find an article from Car and Driver stating they got the ZL1 with the manual to 60 in 3.7 seconds. Next, the Hellcat. Remember, this is not the wide-body Hellcat. I'm using the regular base level model. 3.5 seconds in the auto, and again, a Car and Driver article showed 3.9 seconds with the manual. And finally, the Shelby, 3.3 seconds with the 7-speed double-clutch transmission. It's remarkable how fast the ZL1, Hellcat, and GT500 really are. Even in manual form, the ZL1 and the Hellcat both get to 60 in under 4 seconds. When comparing automatics or DCT transmissions in the GT500's case, the GT500 takes the cake with its 3.3 second 0 to 60 time. It bests the ZL1 and the Hellcat by 0.2 seconds. Okay, next let's talk about weight. Typically within this category, weight is probably discussed as much as horsepower is. Even though the ZL1, Hellcat, and GT500 are great performers, they're not exactly the lightest cars. So let's start off with the ZL1, 3,907 pounds, the Hellcat, 4,429, the GT500, 4,183 pounds. So the Camaro ZL1 is the lightest of the three, coming in 276 pounds lighter than the Shelby GT500 and 522 pounds lighter than the Challenger Hellcat. It's no surprise that the Hellcat is the heaviest car. One thing I wanted to point out, and some of you may know this, but I remember in the 5th generation Camaro, one of the biggest complaints was the fact that it was too heavy. Well, look at it now. It's the lightest car amongst the competition. So good job to Chevrolet for lightening up the ZL1 from one generation to the next. So just like we did for horsepower, let's look at the history of weight. In the ZL1, in 1969, 3,300 pounds. In 2012, 4,120 pounds, a 24% increase. 2017, 3,907 pounds. Alright, looking at these numbers, as mentioned, the Camaro lost weight from the 2nd generation to the 3rd generation, a little over 5% actually, which is pretty amazing considering that the power increased 12% in the same period. The Camaro doesn't get the credit it deserves because you never see this happen anymore. Typically, manufacturers will add horsepower to balance out the extra weight. I don't blame manufacturers for doing this because the regulations are tougher and it's difficult to hide weight, but Chevrolet deserves a lot of credit for taking criticism the ZL1 received in the 2nd generation and reducing its weight while also adding power. Now the Shelby. It also lost some weight too. Going from the 2nd generation to the 3rd generation, it got a 3% decrease in weight. But one thing I have to ding Ford for is the weight for the GT500 in the newest model. I almost feel like they said, okay, well, we'll still be lighter than the Hellcat and only a couple hundred pounds versus the ZL1, but much more powerful than the ZL1, so we'll be fine. But I think they could have made a better attempt to bring the GT500 weight closer to 4,000 pounds. Maybe they're keeping that for the KR version down the road, who knows? Do you think Ford is going to make a KR version for the GT500? And again, no chart for the Hellcat. Sorry, Hellcat fans. I know the Challenger was around for a very long time, but I'm looking at specific trim levels. Maybe 5 years from now, we can redo this with the next generation Challenger. Next, let's look at power to weight ratio. I really like looking at this as it's always surprised me which car performs the best. In the Camaro, you take 650 horsepower and divide it by 3,907 pounds and you get 1.66. In the Hellcat, you take 717 and divide it by 4,429, you get 1.61. And finally, the GT500, 760 divided by 4,183, you get 1.81. So the Shelby takes this category, but one thing that surprised me was the Camaro ZL1 beat out the Hellcat. This goes to show you that horsepower isn't everything and that weight in the Hellcat is crippling for its power to weight ratio. Now let's look at the inverse of this ratio, weight to power. This metric shows you how hard each horsepower has to work. With this, you take the weight and divide it by the power. In the Camaro, you get 6.01, the Hellcat 6.17, and the Shelby 5.5. Again, the Shelby takes this category by besting the Camaro ZL1 and the Challenger Hellcat by more than half a pound per horsepower. Now this next category should be fun, horsepower per dollar. Let's see which one of these cars offer the best bang for your horsepower buck. To calculate the stat, you take the price of the car and divide it by horsepower. Okay, so starting off in the Camaro, you take $62,440 and divide it by 650 horsepower and you get $99.53. In the Hellcat, you take $62,440 and divide it by 717 and you get $87.08. In the Shelby, you take $73,995 and divide it by 760 and you get $97.36. So predictably, the Challenger Hellcat takes this one by a landslide. It bests the Shelby by more than $10 per horsepower and the Camaro by an even larger $12.45. So we all kinda knew this, but if you want the cheapest way to get a lot of horsepower, the Hellcat is your car. Now let's look at quarter mile times. In the Camaro ZL1, Chevy states that it can blast through the quarter mile at 11.4 seconds at 126 miles per hour. In the Challenger Hellcat, Dodge claims 11.2 seconds at 125 miles per hour. In the Shelby, Ford claims 10.7 seconds but doesn't publish the trap speed, so I'm going to say a nice even 130. These are the claimed numbers by each manufacturer, so I'm sure independent magazines and amazing drivers will best these numbers, but it's nice to see that these cars are 10-second cars in stock form. Alright, so now we've got all this horsepower, let's see how far and how fast it can push these cars. Next topic is top speed. In the Camaro ZL1 with its 650 horsepower, it's able to attain a top speed of 198 miles per hour. The Challenger Hellcat and its 707 horsepower rolls all the way to 199 miles per hour. And finally, in a bit of a controversy, the Shelby GT500 and its 760 horsepower are electronically limited to 180 miles per hour. You can see that the Camaro ZL1 and the Challenger Hellcat make good use of their huge power and have a top speed close to 200 miles per hour, which is nuts if you think about it. Several years ago, in order to go 200 miles an hour, you had to rent a race car, but now you can do it in your $60,000 muscle car. Not sure why Ford decided to limit the GT500 to only 180 miles per hour, but it might go to show you that some people are losing interest in this category. So the top speed goes to the Challenger Hellcat. Next, let's talk about the exterior dimensions. Here's a chart showing the length, width, height, and wheelbase of these three cars. Predictably, the Hellcat is the biggest car in this group as it's longer, taller, and has a bigger wheelbase versus the other two. Surprisingly, the GT500 is the widest car in this group. Okay, next let's look at the interior dimensions for these cars because even though they're extremely fast, there's no reason why they can't be comfortable on the inside or be used as daily drivers. Again, not surprised, the Challenger has the most room on the interior. It takes every single category except for front legroom, which the Shelby GT500 takes. When you look at it subjectively, most people say the Challenger is the biggest and most comfortable feeling on the interior, and the Camaro on the flip side feels the most cramped. And when you look at the numbers here, they tell you the same thing. The Camaro has the smaller interior space when compared to the other two cars. Alright, so we just spoke about the space on the interior. How about we see how much you can fit in the trunk? The Camaro has 9.1 cubic feet, the Challenger 16.2 cubic feet, and the Shelby 13.5. Again, not surprised, the Challenger has the most space, coming in with 2.7 cubic feet more space than the Shelby and almost doubling the space in the Camaro. Just for reference, one standard carry-on bag takes up to 1.43 cubic feet of space. So you can store almost 2 more carry-on bags in the Challenger versus the Shelby, and almost 5 more versus the Camaro. The Challenger Hellcat is an ideal car for weekend getaways to be able to store a couple suitcases and just head out of town. Alright, now we've covered some of the performance metrics. Let's talk about how much it's going to cost for you to own these cars. The ZL1's price, $64,695, which includes, again, destination, handling, plus gas guzzler. The Hellcat comes in at $62,440, which includes destination, handling, plus a gas guzzler tax. The GT500, $73,995, which includes destination and handling. I'm not sure about a gas guzzler tax as it has not been announced for the GT500 yet. The Shelby comes in the most expensive car by almost $12,000. It's $9,300 more expensive than the Challenger Hellcat and $11,555 more than the Camaro ZL1. The Shelby is no doubt an expensive car, but it's basically the fastest and has the best performance stats of the three. On the flip side, one could argue that, hey, the Camaro and the Challenger have other things that balance out the equation, like weight in the Camaro and all the extra space in the Challenger. And that's what makes the pricing discussion interesting. If you don't really care about having the ultimate performance but want to have space for your buddies, then the Challenger Hellcat. If you want something on the lighter side that comes with a manual, Camaro ZL1. That's the beauty of competition and the fact that all three of these cars are relatively attainable. Next, let's look at the history of price. Something that I thought was pretty interesting was the Camaro ZL1's engine cost alone was $4,160 in 1969, and as you can see, that equated to a higher sticker price. $7,200 was a lot of money back in 1969. For example, an ultra-luxurious Cadillac Eldorado in 1969 was $6,693, and everyone knows that a Cadillac back then was looked upon as the king. This will also help put it in perspective. Using an inflation calculator, when you adjust $7,200 in 69 to 2019, it equates to $50,372. Let's look at the new Camaro here for a second. From 2012 to the current 2020 model, it's gone up 13% in price. Considering that during this price increase, the Camaro ZL1 increased its horsepower by 12% and decreased its weight by 5%, I would say that the 13% increase in price was justified. Alright, now onto the Shelby. So it had a little bit more of a modest start at $4,195 in 67. Let's do the inflation calculation for the Shelby as well. When you adjust $4,195 in 67 to 2019, you get $32,248. Remember the ZL1 inflation calculator we did? It came out to $50,372. That's a difference of $18,124. More perspective on how expensive the Camaro ZL1 really was back then. Alright, now let's hit a final extra credit item here, and that's the colors. Me personally, I'm a big exterior paint guy. I really like it when there's a long list of color options to pick from. Starting off in the Camaro, Chevrolet offers the ZL1 in 11 different colors. It's a nice spectrum of colors and offers many run-of-the-mill options like white, two blacks, gray, silver, but also goes a little wild with Crush, which is a shade of orange, and also Shock, which is basically a highlighter greenish yellow color. Looking at the Challenger now, it takes the cake by offering 14 different colors. Dodge is really the best at this. They offer the typical colors but also go wild with historical colors like plum crazy purple, go mango orange, and they even have two green colors, sublime green and F8 green. As a whole, I think the Challenger offers the best color choices of these three cars. On the flip side, Ford offers the GT500 in 11 colors. Similar to the other two, they've got a couple lighter colors, two different reds and orange, three different blue colors, and finally my favorite, Grabber Lime. I'm a sucker for green color cars, and the Grabber line isn't only cool, it's also a historical color that was offered in Mustangs from the 60s and the 70s. So that's the end of the comparison. Let's sum up all the categories and wrap it up with some final thoughts. The engine, the GT500 is the most powerful. 0 to 60, GT500. Weight, Camaro. Power to weight ratio and weight to power, GT500. Horsepower per dollar, Challenger Hellcat. Quarter mile, GT500. Top speed, Challenger Hellcat. Interior space, Challenger Hellcat. Cargo space, Challenger Hellcat. Price, Camaro ZL1. So in conclusion, you see that the GT500 pretty much takes all the performance related categories, and most will say, well, duh, those are the most important things because you're buying a performance oriented car. The Camaro is the cheapest car, and the Challenger has the most space and the cheapest entry to horsepower. All three of these cars are just amazing. Looking back when European cars ruled the sports car market, it's fantastic that the American manufacturers are checking the European cars at their own game. The Camaro ZL1, Challenger Hellcat, and the Mustang GT500 are equal and, in my opinion, better than cars such as the BMW M4 or the Mercedes C63 AMG. They're cooler, have an equal amount of technology, more power, and even offer manual transmissions. Yes, these cars are getting expensive, but still offer unbelievable value and the fun factor for your money. Choosing between these three cars would be a daunting task, but if money was no object, I would take the GT500. Which one would you choose? If you're interested in other car comparisons like this one, check out our channel page for more videos and other car reviews. Thanks for watching, and until next time, drive steady.